Okay, good morning. I would like to welcome everyone to Jesús Castro Lopez's defense of this thesis titled Demons, a translation of 4 chapters from Huáscar Robles' novel Demonios. I also wish to express my gratitude to the readers who have graciously agreed to take part in this committee. Thank you so much, Professors Aurora Lauzardo and Jane Ramirez. We will begin this defense today with an introductory presentation by Jesus focusing on the subject of his thesis and the translation challenges he encountered. Afterward, we will turn the floor over to the readers for their comments on the work submitted. So without further ado, Jesus, if you'd like to begin your presentation.
Yes. Right. Is it clear? Is everyone in see? Yes. Okay. Well, before I start, thank you all for being here. Thank you all for being a part of this committee and taking the time out of you guys' busy schedules to help me out with this project. So, my name is Jesus Castro, and for this project, I chose a text called Demonios by Huáscar Robles, of which the title I translated as Demons. Huáscar Robles is a writer and journalist from Caguas, Puerto Rico. He has worked with the New York Times, Orlando Sentinel, the Center for Investigative Journalism, CNN, and El Nuevo Dia. His work as a journalist, he usually covers topics such as LGBTQ issues, post-disaster economies, and Puerto Rico's economy in general. He also has a master's degree in creative writing from the New York University, and he is the author of 2 books so far. He is the author of Puertos Príncipes, Temblemos Todos, which was published in 2014, which is a nonfiction book about, at the times, Haiti's most recent earthquake, and his first and only novel so far, of course, Demonios, which is published in 2022. Demonios was published by La Secta de los Perros in 2022, which I already mentioned before. La Secta de los Perros is a publishing company here from Puerto Rico. In this project, I translated chapters 8 through 10 and half of chapter 11. This spans closely 12,000 words. If it were to be exact, it's 11,979 words. The original language is Spanish, which was translated into English in this project. The key themes are coming of age, identity, Puerto Rico, sexuality, Christianity, pop culture, and of course, mental anguish. So Demonios tells the story of a teenager in the 1980s struggling with his sexuality, his body image, his family's newfound religion, all against a backdrop of US pop culture. Eddie attempts to keep his sexuality a secret from his family, his friends, and just about everybody else, while also struggling to adapt to all the changes in his life. Eddie is later admitted into a youth rehabilitation camp where he witnesses conversion therapy and the exorcising of demons. So here we have a list of the key characters of the novel, or specifically the parts of the text that I worked with. Eddie is the narrator and the protagonist of this novel, which of course goes through all these issues with his self-image, with his sexuality, self-discovery, and whatnot. His mother and his father, mami and papi, which are, of course, his mother is a housewife, which take care of Eddie and her other son Maro whenever they're not at school. His father, papi, is a renowned doctor, which has recently gained more and more fame among his local community. And he has also become a missionary of sort and going on missionary trips to help people who are sick with AIDS and other type of illnesses around the world. Taina and Wu which are the Eyeri's closest friends at the Atlas Academy, where's the school where Eyeri is transferred to halfway through the novel. They share a similar sense of humor, which is it's a very distinct personality trait of Eyeri, and it's an important part of himself and this novel as well. So Orlando and JJ or JJ are staff or key staff that share a lot of time with Eyeri throughout this novel. Orlando is described as an accountant or an assistant by Eyeri himself. He is not quite sure which one he is, but one or the other. JJ is the guidance counselor, and he helps or brings more complications in Eyeri's life in some certain other ways. And of course, Anaudi is another character which is very important in the story because he is a teenager that Eyeri meets in the youth rehabilitation camp. And basically all three of these last characters, Orlando, JJ, and Anaudi, they serve as not quite love interest for Eyeri, because his love is definitely one-sided, but definitely as objects of desire. And they are definitely key to him confronting his feelings and his newfound, not newfound, I guess, but confronting his sexual identity and whatnot. So here we have a section I titled as Why Translate Demonios. I boiled it down to three main reasons. Of course, the first one being repression. And the reason why I mentioned repression is because this novel carries along themes of repression and identity and societal pressures in general. And we are living in a society where there's a resurgence of aggressive conservative ideals. And these ideals can end up hurting marginalized communities such as the queer community, minorities in general, like people of color and whatnot. So I believe this was an important text to cover. Here, for example, in Puerto Rico, we have Proyecto de Dignidad, which is whole political idea is the limiting women's reproductive rights, as well as the queer community in general. And in the US, we have the Trump and everything else. Everything just seems to be boiling up to just a very scary situation for a bunch of marginalized communities. So here we have awareness, which is another related topic that I feel. Awareness, I feel that if a lot of people knew or were more aware of the hardships and struggles people would face, they would be a little more sympathetic and just understand that we are all just human beings trying to live our lives. And as long as we're not hurting anybody, there should be no issue with just existing. So here we have representation, and is another key theme that I believe is important, because representation we can never have enough of. And just presenting this text in English is my attempt at representing, aiding at these issues as mentioned from before. Here we have some examples of queer literature. The first three authors on the left side of this presentation were mentioned in my thesis, in my preface. Here we have Truman Capote, is a work, Other Voices, Other Rooms. It shares a lot of the similar themes and has a very similar narrative to that of Demonios, as it is a coming of age story about a young teenager coming to terms with his sexuality and himself and discovering things along the way. Truman Capote's parallels to Huáscar Robles can also be stemmed from the way they're approached their journalistic life, as well as their literature adventures into literature per se. As Other Voices, Other Rooms was Truman Capote's first novel, and they cover similar subjects as well. Other Voices and Other Rooms was published in 1948, while another work not quite queer literature, but in Cold Blood was published in 1966 and is one of Truman Capote's most famous work, and covers the murder of the Clutter family, and it has a merger between journalism and literature, which is definitely quite noteworthy. So here we have James Baldwin as well, and his work Giovanni's Room, that was published in 1956. This one is another coming of age story, as most of the ones I will mention are. Giovanni's Room is a story about this man called David and his affair relationship with this man called Giovanni, Italian man called Giovanni. Gore Vidal's The City and the Pillar, which is also published in 1948, along with Other Voices in Other Rooms, covers the story of Jim, which is, of course, another coming of age story where it explores his relationships and his relationship with Bob, his lifelong best friend and lifelong love. So here are several other examples of queer literature that I added to this presentation because I felt I didn't mention a lot of more contemporary or more works that were closer to in time per se. So because this one was Demonios was published in 2022, and all of my main examples were from the 40s, the 50s, the 60s. So Luis Negron, Mundo Cruel, which are also Puerto Rican authors, his collection of short stories covers the life as a gay man or as a gay youth in Santurce or San Juan. Charles Rice Gonzalez's Chulito is very famous as a depiction of sexuality in more in a societal way, as masculinity and other themes are the ones that are explored in this novel, being set in the Bronx, and well, a lot of gang culture type of themes as well. Yolanda Arroyo Pizarro's Violeta is a story about a lesbian relationship lesbian affair that explores themes such as race, sexuality, identity, and whatnot. So here are some of the translation challenges that I faced throughout this project. I divided it between the themes and language. So when I start with themes are definitely sensitive subject matter, which are related very specifically to Ayeri's characterization, which I feel is another important theme of the work in general. And here we have language, which is language and imagery, and Spanglish, and what I would call code switching, which here we have slang and slurs as well. And when it comes to going back to sensitive subject matters and its themes, the sensitive subject matter covers things such as depression, anxiety, suicide, and a whole bunch of other complex themes that require a lot of care and just a lot of thoughts to take to go through with this, as well as having in mind that this is a very comedic novel. It has a lot of comedic aspects as well, and juggling between the comedic aspects of the novel and managing the more serious topics, it was a challenge in and of itself, as well as Ayeri's characterization, which I will mention a little further on. Its language and imagery is related to its humor and the way it portrays its vulgarness and rawness per se. Its Spanglish comes from the text's relationship to Spanish and with English and how they interplay with one another, and its relationship with U.S. pop culture, with the increased American colonization in the 80s. Here we have, okay, so here we have a section I labeled as Understanding Ayeri, which I believe him as the protagonist and the narrator of this novel is very important to have who he is or what things are affecting him to be clear. Ayeri is portrayed as an intelligent teenager, one who does not generally speak the same way others teenagers would. Although he is intelligent and observant, he is also very emotional, which is an aspect of his character that reminds you of his age. So Eyeri is going through a lot of things during this novel, and properly understanding all of these things and having all these things in your mind when translating him and getting his voice correctly and portraying him is I felt was very important, because he has a lot of things going on with his puberty and struggling with his Puerto Rican identity himself, because it's something that he doesn't explicitly say, but it is very present in his way of being, his U.S. pop culture and his relationship with English as well, and how he seeks sort of asylum with English, as well as all the societal pressures from having all these changes in your life, with your family now going to church and having to manage that, and all these other family issues of having your father being away and your mother being depressed because your father isn't around, and how he copes with all of this using self-deprecating humor, and how this all kind of plays upon itself. His desire is also a big key of his character, as um, given puberty and his struggles with sexual identity, a lot of his mental dialogue is more like him struggling with his desire and if it's okay and if it's not okay, and his acceptance of himself. His body image, of course, which at one point in the novel he does turn uh, anorexic as well, because of his shame toward his own body and his self-worth as well. So here we have some of the examples of the slang and slurs that I encountered. See, there's just some of the examples. Here I have one that I felt was particularly noteworthy. Here was that gave me a little bit of trouble. Here was a section in the novel that was mentioning different types of drugs, which is el pasto, el caballo, la coca, el crack, la pinta, la seca, la meca. So these first four are generally really easy to translate and find. El pasto obviously being marijuana, weed, el caballo being horse, coca being cocaine, and crack, of course, being crack as well. La pinta, la seca, la meca was where the challenging part was. And truth is, I went through a lot of dictionaries. I went through several different sources, and I asked a lot of people around, seeing if this was like common slang or something. I called up some cousins, I called up some some friends, and no one could really tell me what pinta la seca la meca really meant. So I gave it some more thought and thought about how this all felt really intentional, and um, if they were actually translations of some other drug that I couldn't be able to find, then the intention of them all three being together was part of the author adding a bit of his creative freedom into it. So I thought that was a point where I just kind of had to let the author be and leave that part in as a part of the translation. Okay, so here we have some other parts of some other slang. We have ligar, which I think I already solved as ogle, which is a word that is very Puerto Rican. I don't think I've heard it used in the same context in other forms of Spanish. I believe tetón is another word where I had to get a little creative with the translation, where I think I just believed I just did it as a fatty, as I believed it was more idiomatic in English. And this is something like that. So we have as well rascahuevos, which was more straightforward in the sense that it was just kind of ball scratcher. And that's the kind of solution I came up with as well. Here we have the slurs in the novel, as well as maricón and pato. I believe that maricón was used very sparingly in my translation or my final work. I decided to keep in pato. Most of the times it was used as when it was used in the novel, and I just used it or kept it the same way. But when it came to maricón, I believe I translated it for the most part as a faggot, as I felt it portrayed a similar type of tone or weight to what was being said. And But Pato was more, he used, whenever Pato was used, I felt Eyeri, for the most part, was using it as a way to describe his own actions. And I felt it was just better to leave Pato just as Pato, and maricón we can translate as the F word. So here we have here we come back to the relation between Spanish and English in the text. So there's a particular section where a pastor is giving a sermon, and he says this: Han sucumbido a los placeres del mundo, han olvidado sus labores de esposo y esposa. You let the door open, and the enemy went right in. You can't have it both ways, baby. The Lord or the world. Which one is it? ¿Eres blanco o negro, frío o caliente? Lo tibio lo vomitaré de mi boca. So this section here is untranslated in my text because this is exactly the way it is written in the source text. He is switching between English and Spanish, which is something that is relevant because in the following paragraph, Edgy makes note of this and he mentions it in the novel. Oh, my bad. Sorry. He mentions it in the novel. This is the text translated part of the following paragraph. I said, I never expected the pastor to begin his first televised service accusing the entirety of Puerto Rico. I was even more surprised that he mixed English and Spanish on an island that doesn't fully grasp either one. And I felt this was noteworthy because the relationship between English and Spanish in this text is so important that simply eliminating this part and just standardizing into all just English would have kind of been a disservice to what was happening in the context of the novel. So I felt, especially since it was mentioned in the following paragraph and how it's an observation that Eyeri makes, I felt it was worth maintaining it the same way. Okay, well, that will conclude my initial introduction to my project. Thank you all for your attention, and well, let's keep going.
Okay, thank you very much, Jesus. There are a couple of things I'm sure that even from the presentation, the readers may want to comment on, and I'd like to begin this discussion or this conversation about your work, starting with the readers. So whether Aurora or Jane, I'm not sure which one of you wants to begin in your comments about Jesus's work. Aurora, Jane.
Whoever wants to begin is fine with me. Jane.
Well, there you are.
Jane, you have your microphone off, muted. Jane, your microphone is muted.
I've clicked on it. I've clicked on it 3 times. Okay. I apologize in advance. I am dealing with a rather nasty cold and I'm medicated to the gills, but I'm coughing anyway, so we'll do the best we can. First, I'd like to congratulate you, Jesus, on getting to this point, and on this very interesting and challenging translation project that you've chosen, partly because, as you pointed out, there are some serious flaws in the source text, and yet you dealt with them. I noticed one thing as I was making my comments, that at the beginning I was making quite a few comments. At the end, I was not finding nearly so many things to comment on. So I felt like by the time you got into chapter 10 and 11, you were really finding your voice. So that's a good thing. We should be improving as we go along, as we translate, getting more into the work. And I felt you did that. I personally felt that this was an area that I'm glad I was on this particular defense because I do have some expertise in religious groups and the way they talk. As you mentioned just now, with the slurs, when you translate profanity or slurs, and this is something I often discuss in my classes, you don't go for the exact dictionary meaning. You go for what would this character say in this situation if he or she were a native speaker of the target language. Sometimes you have to choose something quite different from excuse me, from the dictionary meaning of the term in Spanish. When you go into English, it has to be what's appropriate for that. And I've made a few suggestions for you, like, for instance, in the prayer when Dad comes home and Ejeri is responding, participating and responding to his father's prayer as a show. That was a very interesting episode with the mother signaling that you're really putting on a show. I would stick with the show that came from, I don't know if I mentioned it, rather than spectacle, you changed it to spectacle. I think show was, and as was in the source text, was a little more appropriate. But anyway, the types of responses that he was giving didn't always ring naturally to me because this is something I'm familiar with. I hear how people respond, and in prayer in English as well as Spanish. So I've made a couple of suggestions there. I have a lot of notes here. I'm not going to be able to go into all of them. From your presentation just now, I want to mention that pinta la seca la meca. For some reason, what came into my mind every time I read that was la niña la pinta la Santa Maria.
No, may I intervene? Because I commented on this one. La seca y la meca is an idiom. You look for la seca y la meca and you will find it. And in this particular context, what he's saying is that any drug that you can imagine is available. So la seca y la meca, if you look la seca y la meca, it is misspelled because la seca should be with a C. But even if you write it with an S, don't look pinta seca and meca, just look for seca and meca. And this is a suggestion, I would say, when you find a set of words that you don't know what to do with. First, you look for them together, but then try isolating them or putting them together in different order. But la seca y la meca is a very old expression, which means everywhere or anything you can imagine. So my suggestion would be play with the words when you're searching. Just don't limit yourself to looking for them in the exact order, because then you might miss them. But I sent you a couple of links of where to look for it so that you can mention it.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that actually the last time I looked at the thesis, I did make a comment about that. I'm not Jesus, I'm not sure if that wound up anywhere, but yeah, seca with a C, if you see la seca la meca, you will find it, and it means, from here to Mecca, from, here anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
So the idea would be like anything, anything you can get your hands on.
Yeah.
But what I wanted to say about that particular phrase is that, all right, it still sounds better in Spanish, I mean,
Yeah, and in Puerto Rico, they also say la seca, la meca y la tuntuneca, because you know that we are very rhythmical with our word plays, right? And so you can hear la seca, la meca y la tuntuneca, for instance. So but it just means anything you can imagine, like a whole bunch of diverse things.
Yeah.
And may I add something, Jane, about what you
Of
said
course.
of the religious discourse? There's one point, Jesus, and first of all, I am so happy to be here with you. Thank you for inviting me to this. Jesus was my student this semester, and I've grown very fond of him and of his hard work. And I sent you the revised thesis, and we talked a little bit about a few things. I liked your presentation very much. I think your presentation put everything in context, and I commend you for that. But about the religious discourse, there's a point where you say, por mi grandísima culpa, porque that's the I confess. That's the I confess that you say in Mass. And it's, I always joke about that. I say, por mis pecados, or, you know, for through my faults, my it's like the mea culpa.
Mea maxima
So
culpa,
there is like a, wouldn't you say, Jane, there's a fixed discourse for that in that particular prayer that you say at a particular point in the Mass, which is the I confess.
Okay, that's a point I'm going to come to a little bit later.
Okay, all right.
But
Yeah, no, but see, I thought
I
that you were
think
done with the religious.
we need to characterize this religion that we're dealing with here,
Yeah.
because
yeah.
it's not Catholicism.
No, but that is a phrase from lo de
Yes.
por mi culpa,
Yeah.
por mi culpa, por mi grandísima
Sure.
culpa. I remember it when I was from when I was a kid, you know.
Yeah, and
so.
that also is in English as well. Mea culpa, mea maxima
Yeah.
culpa.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Jane, we interrupted you, so if you want to
So
go back
ahead.
to
Sorry, it's just that we all get
discourse.
very
No,
carried
no.
away.
I mean, this. I think
This
it's
is a
much more valuable
conversation.
if we discuss rather than just having each of us give a formal presentation. So I'm all in favor of any interruptions you want to give me, including you, Jesus. If you want to chime in on any of this, of course, we want you to. In fact, in a minute, I'm going to give you a chance to talk. But what with the second la Meca, and that's what I was getting at. I'm not really familiar with the expression in Spanish, but that was the feeling I got when I was a kid studying history, and we learned the La Niña, La Pinta, La Santa Maria. Even though it was in English, but we called them that because that was the name of them, of the ships. We used it as a kind of an etc. thing. It was almost a joke or a game that we had, because if we were just going on and on with a list, we'd say en la niña, la pinta, la Santa Maria at the end of it. So that was the feeling I got with that expression, and I guess from what you're telling me, I kind of got it right, even though it was a rather far-fetched comparison. Okay. I'd like, Jesus, for you to help me out a little, because of course I have not read the first 7 chapters of the novel. I would like to. Maybe I will get around to doing that. But at first I was confused, because in your preface, when you were giving the summaries of the chapters, you just said at school. And I was still thinking, okay, like perhaps public school or a private school, but not necessarily religious and so forth. And it wasn't until much later that I found out about the Atlas and Academy. When I started seeing words like academy, I was going, wait a minute, this doesn't fit with my first picture that I had at school. I think you could be a little more specific in that part of the preface to give a better setting to the reader at the beginning. But we do kind of need to talk a little bit about what religion we're talking about, what kind of religion we're talking about here, because this was a conversion for the parents, and I see now that the school is affiliated with the church. I began to see that as we got into it. So I was later able to see that and understand, okay, this is before the conversion camp that you talked about later. But how what kind of religion are you considering this? I mean, I just got done saying this is not Catholicism, but is it? Because you use some Catholic terms in a couple of places. So how can you describe this religion?
I definitely think it's obviously Christianity.
Right.
They definitely could believe in the Lord, but I don't believe it's explicitly stated which one it is, and I'd have to go revise. It's not explicitly stated per se. I believe it's kind of just like a Christian school. They focus more on the vision of God in itself, but not in itself. The originally, obviously, they go to sermons and they go to other things. Maybe I'm missing something. I grew up Catholic. I grew up Catholic. Maybe I'm missing something when it comes to religion.
Well, it seems evangelical in nature.
Evangelical.
That's what I was gonna
Evangelical,
say.
fundamentalist, charismatic.
Yeah,
Is what I was thinking.
Yeah, because these very famous preachers from
Exactly,
the 18th are evangelical, and
Right.
and it's certainly not Catholic. It is. I would say it's more evangelical. I mean, it is evangelical. These preachers are evangelical, and the kind of ritual where people go and then they have the
And then
and then
when
they hit them,
they strike in
the
the
whole
right.
thing. Yeah,
That's
it is clearly evangelical to me.
And I would go beyond evangelical to fundamentalist and charismatic. And that's not my background, but I am familiar with it. I've been involved with people who are from groups like this. So there were a couple times when I wondered about your background, Jesus. I didn't know if that was even appropriate to ask, but you went in and said you were raised Catholic, because you slipped up a couple of times, like referring to Spencer, el enviado Spencer. When you first mentioned, when he's first mentioned, you mentioned you didn't say anything about, you didn't translate the el enviado Spencer. You just referred to him as the priest who would be preaching at Sunday Mass. And I'm going, wait a minute, priest, Mass, that's Catholic. And that does not fit this religion. So that needs to be changed. You also, there was an expression a couple times in when prayer was involved, you mentioned praying to the Holy Father. Holy Father is used usually by Catholics to refer to the Pope. So a fundamentalist group would not be saying Holy Father, they would be saying maybe Heavenly Father. So there are a few things that I've mentioned those in my comments, and you'll have a chance to look at that. Okay.
May I add
Aurora.
something? Yes,
Sure.
about the Mass. And in that sense, this is a very interesting example of how our own bias and our own formation and who we are, which is inevitable, we are who we are. The author is very clear. He says culto dominical, and Catholics don't refer to Mass as culto dominical. So the word culto is clearly not Catholic. So in that sense, there are these little biases that always
You're correct.
appear when
that seems like a major oversight on my end. No. It's like
And
just
that's
my
over
bias
here.
is seeping through and going through my background, and just kind of just how that seeped into it. But definitely, I will be looking through that and definitely making changes, adjustments as well.
Yeah, I found that to me was Jane. I am enjoying very much what you're discussing now, because it was something that I could see. I recently have been translating Martin Luther King, and they don't talk about the Mass, and
Right.
so it's interesting, and you have to revisit all your previous knowledge or your experiences that are so heavy in the way we speak, and we interpret words that aren't even there, you know, and this is very interesting, a very interesting discussion as a translation problem.
Yeah. So would it the term here would be service? No.
Sure. Or the Sunday morning worship is very
Or the
commonly
worship,
used
Worship.
today.
Okay. Worship or
Yes.
service.
Or
Okay.
service.
Yeah.
Yeah. I like worship too. That's a, you know, I mean, that's a, okay. Very good. Very good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very
And
interesting.
you know, I've been reading James Baldwin lately. So, you know, you know, sometimes there's so many things that are going on in the translation process that you just don't, you can't pay attention to them all the time as a reader, as an advisor, as a translator. You know, there's always going to be something, but this is very, very important, Jane, and I'm glad you're discussing it. And I'm sorry for any interruption there.
No. And
No,
David, what you just, the fact that we're talking about this is something that we also tell our students. Jesus, you're seeing a community of colleagues here, and now
Yes.
you're in this conversation between colleagues, and these are the things like, if I don't see something, Dave, and I ask David, he will see it, or Jane will see it, and that's why, in fact, the three of us have worked together at times, and that is the importance of community of translators, that somebody will see it, somebody will see wherever we might oversee something. And that's the beauty also of a community, a professional community. And it's
The
so
hive
important that
mind.
the
hive mind.
And I don't know whether I said this when you were in my class way back as an undergrad, Jesus, but I usually do say it in my undergrad class. I've always said, start collecting people who know things.
I remember that. I remember that, yeah.
Do you? Okay. And I think that's very important to, you know, to know who to call when you have a particular question in an area where you're not an expert. Because for all that we say that translators have to become instant experts in whatever subject, you know, we can't really. That's what we try to do. That's what we need to try to do, but nobody can become an instant expert. So keep collecting people. That's one of the most valuable things to do. And if you have a relationship with someone where you help each other out frequently, that is fantastic. So I'm going to mention a couple other things, but since I brought up el enviado Spencer, I've been playing with different ways you could have translated. Now later on, after that first one, when you just mentioned him as priest who would be preaching at mass, which obviously you're going to change. But later on, you started calling him God sent, which is definitely the right idea. That's definitely what I would change it to. God sent, the God sent one. You don't have to take notes. This is I'm sending you all of this. My comments.
Sorry, force of habit.
Okay, all right. Well, I should never criticize taking notes. So yeah, take notes. I also thought of maybe the God's messenger Spencer or something. And I thought, since you did mention priest, I thought, well, but what's common in this sort of religious group is that they have prophets. And so maybe the prophet Spencer might be a possibility. That's straying away from the actual meaning of the word, but I'm trying to think of things that would be likely things for a religious group like this to be calling their leaders. So you need to pick one and stick with it throughout, and that's...
You know, I just looked at those particular passages, and I think it would probably be more natural for people to say the God send, not the God sent.
Okay. I was thinking of it as an adjective, the God sent one, but the God sent, okay.
I mean, yeah,
I see your
in the
point.
no, in the sense that
I
term
agree
is
with
used
you.
all the time. What a godsend, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah,
as
but
an
it's
adjective.
usually with a circumstance, not with a person. I've never heard a person called that, but
Would it
maybe
be,
I'm biased. Maybe I'm showing my bias because I'm trying to think of things that I've heard in religious groups. And
would it be
so
more
maybe
like
we need,
Spencer the
I've-
God sent, or Spencer the God send, or just God send Spender? God spend Spencer?
boy, it's hard to even say, isn't it?
Yeah.
I would research that a little bit, but I've heard quite often with regard to people, and not within a religious context, but oh, that person is such a godsend.
Okay,
And
okay, well,
it actually, it's not so unusual. But you know, maybe within a religious context, it should be. I don't know. I think it's fine as the way it is there.
okay. But it should be capitalized because they're using it like a title, like a name. So I think sometimes you did and sometimes you did. I'm not sure about that. I'd have to look again. Sorry, never mind. But if you didn't, it should be capitalized. Okay, well, you convinced me. I can go along with that.
Actually, in the Oxford English Dictionary, it says godsend, a very helpful or valuable event, person, or article.
Okay. All right.
And the Cambridge said that. I was just looking for the Cambridge while you were looking
Okay.
at the Oxford. Yeah.
Oh goodness, there's so many things I want to talk about, but I can't go on and on forever. I do want to mention one with Ejiri, Taina, and Wu, when they're talking among themselves, and at one point they say, I can't remember exactly how it was in the source text, but mira, repite conmigo, and then they say this phrase about cable TV empowers me, which is how you translate it. I don't know if you know that is actually they're using a Bible verse. And I think that's an important thing to be aware of because it's Philippians 4:13, and it says I can do all things in Christ that strengtheneth me. That's the King James version, but it's todo lo puedo en Cristo que me fortalece. And so this is exactly the same. Todo lo puedo con el cable TV que me fortalece. So you really need to have when you translate it as just I can do anything because cable TV empowers me, you lose the point. And they all say amen and hallelujah at the end of it. It's obviously a Bible verse that they've had drilled into them, and so they're playing on that. So that's an important thing, easy thing to miss if you're not familiar with the verse in Spanish, but if something that you need to get right. There's a couple of other places in the text where there's an actual Bible verse. Walter, when Walter shows up and stands in front of a Yeti, you translated it said el demonio, it said los demonios tenían buen gusto or something of that sort, and you translated as sin has good taste. It's not sin. It's got to be the demons, because the thing is, what their point is, the demons had good taste in choosing such a fine body to possess.
Well, not only that, but the title of the book.
Right. So it really needs to be, you can't, I don't think in that one you have the liberty to change it to something similar and say sin. It needs to be demons. One other thing I want to mention, and then I'll quit here.
May I add something about the
Sure.
demons? Because we're right on this. I would reconsider, Jesus, demonios y endemoniados. And
Yes.
there were sometimes, there are a few instances where I would like you to go over your decision, because endemoniado is possessed, is
Mhm.
it's the
It's the
person
person who's
in which
possessed.
the demon is, the person has been possessed by the demon and is now in its body or their body. So go over that, because as David just said, the word demon is a very powerful word in this text because it's the title word. So maybe go over that a little bit, check a few instances. I marked them in what I sent you, but double check. And I don't know, is there a word for being possessed with the word demon? Because it's not demonized, it's not.
No, there
Because
isn't that I know.
endemoniado and demonio, I mean, in Spanish it works beautifully because you have el demonio and you have un endemoniado. And endemoniado is the one who is possessed. So the word play, which is something
We
that we will
use
talk
the-
when it's
We use the demon hyphen possessed, but
Yeah, or possessed
no.
by the demons. Yeah,
Yeah,
possessed,
right.
or
There
possessed
isn't
by
a
demons. Yeah,
single
Yeah.
word to be endemoniado, no.
Yeah. So
that we know of.
yeah, I wouldn't know.
And yeah, I mentioned that in one place too.
Yeah.
Okay,
Maybe the
cool.
demon possessed, as you were saying, so that you keep the word demon, which is very important, but it is clear that it's not like an apparition of a demon, but that this person has been possessed by the demon. Just
Right. One time, I don't have the wording written down here, but one time it almost sounded like you were saying that Walter was possessing the demon, and it didn't work out that way. It's the demons possessing him. So there, I have notes on that. So at least you'll find that one. Aurora's probably been very diligent and marked all of them. So that's good.
I remember the exact word you're mentioning because Aurora also mentioned it as well,
Okay.
and we talked about it.
Okay. So the last one I'm going to mention is when El Enviado is going to be on TV. And they're talking about the preparations from that. And at one point it says that in the source text it says speaking of the mom and saying por fuera mamá era de Cristo, pero por dentro mamá era de Caguas. And you said mom belonged to God. On the outside, mom belonged to God, but on the inside, she belonged to Caguas. There's a special thing that I've observed about Cristo. And I've seen this in Mexico. I've seen this in Colombia. I've verified it with people in different countries because I used to translate religious literature for publication. So I've talked with a lot of people from different South American, Central American countries about a lot of the vocabulary that we use because we're trying to use vocabulary that works in all countries, and that's not an easy thing to do. But where a Spanish speaker uses Cristo, an English speaker uses Jesus. And I think there's a couple of reasons for that. My theory on that is one thing, it's because each of them is a two-syllable word with this stress on the first syllable. And therefore, music, songs that have Jesus, the word Cristo is going to fit right in. Like I put in my comments, there's a hymn that says in its chorus, Jesus, 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 sweetest name I know. In Spanish, it's Cristo, 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 nombre sin igual. And just because of the same rhythm, it's very easy to substitute Jesus for Cristo and vice versa. I think there's another reason, and this one, you can confirm this for me, Jesus, if you like. Spanish speakers are very accustomed to knowing a lot of people named Jesus, because it's very common to name people Jesus in Spanish-speaking countries. As you know, in English-speaking countries, it's not at all common to name people Jesus. People in the States are much more aware than they used to be of the fact that there are a lot of Hispanics named Jesus, but they still think of that as Jesus or Jesus, for begging your pardon, but that's how I hear it very often. But you don't usually hear an English-speaking family, non-Hispanic, naming their son Jesus. So for English speakers, Jesus is the very personal name that my friend, the part of the Godhead with whom I have a personal relationship is Jesus. You can just hear it in the way people say the name. In Spanish, since you're accustomed to there being a lot of Jesuses. You say Jesus, you're going to say Jesus ¿quién? ¿Cuál Jesús? Jesus Rodriguez, Jesus Castro, Jesus whatever. So Cristo, which applies only to Jesus Christ. Cristo, which is the title, it's Greek for the Hebrew Messiah. It's the same title in Greek and in Hebrew. Cristo is the very personal name for a Spanish speaker when they're talking about my close relationship with Cristo. So here I really feel strongly that when it says that mom was era de Cristo, I would write she belonged to Jesus. So, and no, it's not that you're wrong to occasionally translate a different name, saying God instead of Jehovah or God instead of Christ or whatever. But in this particular circumstance, I think that was the way to go. So I've put a lot of those comments in there. I think you've done a very good job with most of what you've done. That's just maybe my area that I'm more conscious of. So, so congratulations. Good job. I liked your preface. I felt the very last part of your preface when you were explaining your reasons for finding value in translating this book. I thought you did very well with that. And so I commend you, and I agree with your reasons for feeling that we all need to be. Okay, I'll say one more thing. This is very personal. Something that had a big impact on me many years ago was a role that Billy Crystal played in a soap opera satire. I can't remember whether it was Mary Hartman, or whether it was Soap. I kind of think it was Soap. Soap, okay. He played a gay man at a time when we did not see gay people featured, at least certainly not in favorable ways, in TV shows. He played it with so much sensitivity and so much relatability that I thought, well, that's what we need. We need a whole lot more shows like this so that people can see that people are people and get away from the labels.
Get away from demonizing.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That happens in politics too, the demonizing of the opposition. And
yeah, well, you know, religion has been politicized and politics has become evangelized. So
yeah, there you go. That's true. And yeah, so I appreciated very much your words at the end of your preface. And I will quit for now unless I'm going to interrupt Aurora too.
Thank you very much, Jane.
Thank you, Jane. Aurora.
See, there's a Galician saying about the meigas. Meigas in Galician are witches. And they say, yo no creo en las meigas, pero de haberlas, haylas. So, demons, yeah, there might be some. I don't, there might be
knows?
some around.
Who knows?
I kind of do believe that there
Yeah,
are
yeah.
demons.
Okay.
So,
Okay. Well,
all right.
again, Jesus, thank you very much for inviting me, and this has been an opportunity to get to know your work better. And I commented several things. We met on Tuesday because we had our end of class meeting, and so I said, well, by the way, I'm reading your thesis, and we talked a little bit about some things which are not. I don't need to go over now, but I do want to mention something that I found interesting, and it is a true translation challenge in this novel, which are the numerous references to cultural productions, artifacts, whatever, Puerto Rican, right? And I have not been able to find, how old is this man? How old is Huáscar Robles? Do you know? Because I couldn't find it. I couldn't find it in the usual.
Yeah, most of his information is all on his personal website, and
But
I
it doesn't
believe
say when he was born.
Yeah, I can just assume he is somewhere in his 30s, mid to late 30s,
Really?
probably.
But
I
if
would
he
assume, or maybe
remembers
40s.
Mirta Perales, come
No,
No,
on.
no, no.
No, I'm wrong.
I'd say 50. I'd say 50 easily.
Okay, you know why I'm asking, because a lot of his references, I understand, and I mentioned some of them to you because I don't know if of course you're a lot younger, and some things maybe it didn't occur to you that they exist, like Sube Nene Sube.
Exactly.
Sube Nene
get-
Sube
yeah.
is a program which precisely he mentions when he's talking about Lidia Echevarria and Luis Vigorón,
Right.
which was this program where couples that wanted to get married and didn't have enough money to celebrate a wedding would go, and there was this post that was
El palo
covered-
encebado.
El palo encebado, which was covered in grease, and the man, of course, had to climb to the top and bring a little banner or something that was on the top, and if he could do that, then they would celebrate their wedding on television. And the woman who was standing looking at her man climbing the post would say, "Sube, nene,
Sube,
sube,
nene, sube,
sube, nene,
sube,
sube."
nene,
Okay, so
sube.
that was
Right.
the cheering of the beloved man who would make possible the dream of a television wedding. So in that sense, he does play a lot, and I love it because, of course, to me that's recalling a recollection of my youth and the things that there were on TV when I was young. And so there are a couple of those like very Puerto Rican expressions or very Puerto Rican references that I suggest that you look at some. I just want to bring some of them because it's fun to talk about them, because I know that you will go over and solve them beautifully. But for instance, there's a moment when he says on page 36, "No había Tony Daza que valiera," right? And that's a very Puerto Rican. No hay tal cosa que valga. Like that won't help. That won't suffice. That won't. So it's not that there's nothing I can do about this, but that is not going to solve the problem. Or even if you did this, it won't. Whatever will not be solved. And for instance, las pajitas que le caen a la leche. Is there a phrase in English for pajitas que le caen a la leche?
That I know of.
Because that means that, well, it's just little things that go wrong. You know, you have a beautiful glass of milk, but then a little dust or a little pajita falls on it. I mean, it's not perfect, right? And this thing about caguas, caguas is something like Ponce, in the sense that these are these municipalities that they think that they're like
That they should
like
be the
this.
capital.
Exactly, exactly.
Yes.
And of course, I'm from San Juan, so I don't want to sound.
Obviously, you don't see it.
But
And that
but
we're
it's
special.
yeah. But in Caguas, del municipio autónomo de Caguas, and Caguas was kind of identified with kind of like a nationalism, like Caguas nationalism, and so
El
there's this
corazón
moment.
criollo, el corazón criollo de
Right.
Puerto Rico.
Right. And so when he mentioned several times que su mamá es de Caguas, so like, what can I say? Es como la que decía que Ponce es Ponce y lo demás es isla, la que era la
Es parking.
y lo demás es parking, ¿verdad? ¿Cómo es que se llama la de Mis Universo?
Right.
Santi Esteban, Ana Santi Esteban. Okay, so there is this fun characterization and a self-deprecating. I see that he's self-deprecating humor, and I find it very interesting because that's a way of kind of not punching us in the face, but punching us nonetheless. And I do like the way that he works with that.
Can
so-
I just,
Yeah.
sorry, I have a
Sure.
question because you've mentioned a couple of things, and actually, the suba, whatever that was.
Sube,
Sube,
nene,
nene,
sube.
Okay. And also this the paja en la leche.
Mhm.
Now, there's imagery there that's completely lost because there are other resonances as well that go beyond, I mean, I think that, they're even Freudian in both cases. I mean, the thing is that if you think about Peninsular Spanish, for that second, me cago en la leche, but also, paja, and I mean, there's like a combination of both sexual and religious imagery that's going on here that I don't know how you could possibly translate that.
Yeah, no, and you're right. A lot is going to be lost in translation, and a lot of his wordplay. But that's those in that when I sent you my revised version, I said maybe just comment this on your preface, because to me this is a true translation problem, to which there might not be 100% satisfactory solution. You're right, David. I mean, totally, I agree with you, totally.
If
But
I can
maybe-
interrupt there for just a
Sure.
moment, what I suggested with sube nene sube is just, that's something you have to leave in Spanish.
Yes. By the way, sube nene sube was followed by pa arriba, papi, pa arriba, which
Right.
was the second, which was instead of,
And-
this is what I grew up with. And, instead of el palo encebado, we had like a little ramp, which was also encebada. There was something about slipperiness in those programs. And the man had to get up. The woman was at the top, like a Juliet, and he would come up, and if she could grab him or something, then they would, I don't know if they were already married, and then they could have another prize or something. But these were the Luis Vigoró programs.
Productions,
And Luis
right.
Vigoró and Lidia Echevarría were a part of our everyday life. And that's why
Exactly.
when Luis Vigoró was murdered and Lidia Echevarría was accused of the murder, it was like a family catastrophe. I mean, people wouldn't know what to do, So it was a very important part of our culture.
Excuse me, even El Gran Combo even did a
Played.
song.
Yeah.
Sube nene sube song.
Yeah,
You can
the
see-
jingle.
You can listen
yeah.
to it on.
Yeah.
Well, it's more than a jingle. It's a whole
Yeah, well,
song.
it's the
You can
opening.
listen
Yeah,
to it
it's the theme.
on
Yeah.
YouTube. I just listened
Yeah.
to it last night.
I would love to sing them, but I don't dare. But I do know them by heart. Sube, nene,
yeah.
sube, y pa arriba, papi, pa arriba. So anyway,
And do you remember Mirta Perales?
of course.
Of course.
Of
So
course.
Jane
I
and
would sing
Ramirez,
that one too.
Jane and Aurora duet the song now. Duet the song together now.
I got a cold.
I'll let you be surprised. Okay.
I'm glad you excluded me from that.
Okay, and there is this so again, maybe just mention it, Jesus, but just maybe mention all this Caguas thing, because Caguas and being from Caguas is a thing in itself, okay? And I think that part of his relationship with his mother has to do with her Cagua, being from Caguas and being and acting like a person from Caguas, okay? And there's other Puerto Rican expressions, for instance, si a alguien se le iba la mano. Si se te va la mano is that you
Yeah.
got too carried away on something, and then I have to leash you, okay, and bring you
Take
back.
away your tambourine.
Right. So se le iba la mano era que that they got too carried away and then and about and these are two things that I also told you that maybe you mentioned them now in your presentation, and I do think that code switching, that Spanglish, is a real problem. And for me, I speak from my personal experience. It is very difficult because I know English and Spanish, so I can read Spanglish, or I can read one sentence in Spanish and one sentence in English, and as Jane was saying. But depending on who your reader is, my husband's mother will not understand a single word if I leave them in Spanish. So, yeah, no, and voy enseguida. So, I'm not saying that this is wrong or this is right, but to me, that is one of the most difficult problems, because again, this is my personality and my person in my fingertips, and I can read both, but I don't know if all the readers, if your intended reader is going to be able to read that in Spanish. So David, go ahead. I think
Your
you're
microphone's
muted.
You're
off.
muted, yeah.
Yeah, I'm unmuted now. A couple of points about that. One thing that I noticed with those the code switching segments is that quite often almost the same thing would be said in both languages. Now, the other
Yes.
thing that I want to say too is that one of my favorite authors of all time is Thomas Mann. He has nothing to do with Latin American literature whatsoever. Although sometimes he does have Latin American characters in his works. But, you know, his greatest work is Magic Mountain.
Which is a
And Magic Mountain has whole sections in French. That when translated from German into English, the whole sections in French were left in French.
French.
And that's it. So, you know, whenever this comes up that, you know, especially, I mean, we want to give an idea where this novel was produced. So I think that especially if there's some kind of shifting back and forth where it's, you know, the meanings are so close, just leave it.
Yeah.
That's my feeling.
Yeah. No, and I agree with you, but it doesn't cease to be a problem, that because some things, as you said, a lot of things are said in English and immediately in Spanish, others are left only in English or only in Spanish, and I just see it as a problem that needs at least that neneeds an explanation, or that needs a reflection, just a reflection.
Yeah, I just saw it as a trait or characteristic of the novel itself and of the characters in the novel. Most of these characters, they juggle between Spanish and English. A lot of them. See, the students per se, they use English as kind of an escape, while the religious figures in the novel, they kind of use it as a form of distancing from all the bad parts of our Puerto Rican culture and Spanish as a whole. And I just thought that was a very interesting point and something that has weight to leave it in Spanish and English because of the relationship in the text as well.
And as you mentioned in that one passage where Ejeri comments that I was surprised that he mixed English and Spanish. Obviously, you had to mix English and Spanish, or else that comment by Ejeri would have meant nothing. However, there was another Bible verse in the Spanish part with the porque no eres tibio ni frío ni caliente, pero eres tibio, te vomitaré de mi boca. That is such an iconic verse that I really wanted to see that one translate. I hate to, with novels, I never want to say footnotes, but I almost feel like a couple of times it might have been worth having a translation in a footnote.
Or not a footnote, an endnote, maybe. Endnote.
Okay, that would be better, less intrusive. Except I hate endnotes because if it's on the same page, I'll read it. But if the endnote, I've got to keep this bookmark in the back of the book and keep flipping it.
Well,
no, I'd rather have a footnote.
Yeah, I wanted to say a couple of things in response to what Aurora said about, well, we don't know who's going to be reading this. Now, look, in Puerto Rico, does everyone who's going to pick up this book, does everyone understand English? I don't know. So there are the parts that are in English, As for footnotes, I have very mixed feelings about them. However, Paul Auster, who's one of the greatest novelists, was one of the greatest novelists, I think, in 20th, 21st century literature in the United States. He has novels where half of the plot occurs in footnotes. So if you don't read the footnote, it's like you have to read the footnote because you miss half the story. It's really ingenious. So I have very mixed feelings about that. There are many there are many translators of Latin American literature who have used footnotes, especially with works that contain indigenous references. But I'm not overly fond of it. And since I don't really feel that the bilingual parts in here are that obstructive, at least in this section that that Jesus chose, I think they can be left.
But I think I would have been frustrated when it actually mentions that. Oh, what was the name of the guy? The muscle guy,
Axel.
When Axel looks askance at Shusha because of her poor translation, I would have been frustrated if I hadn't been able to see why that translation was wrong. If I had been reading that and were not bilingual, that would have really bugged me.
Yeah, I mentioned that to you, and I say, how are you going to let the reader know that this was a bad translation? But about the footnotes, I have to say that if it's a literary device, as in Paul Auster, that footnote is part of the fiction, or as Borges did too, the footnotes were part of the fiction. That is something else. But I would hope that my reader that the versicles of the Bible, the verses of the Bible will resonate. As you have to help them with the translation, and that's why if you choose the right words, the verses will resonate, and that's the importance of the translation. But I wouldn't like to have all the verses cited in that, because then you would have to cite pa arriba, papi, pa arriba, and then you have to cite,
sure.
No offense, but but it's the same. I mean, it's an extra linguistic, it's a cultural reference, be it religious or popular or whatever. And I don't think so, but you help with the translation. Sometimes when I was translating Martin Luther King, I would have several versions of the Bible in Spanish, and then I would play and I would choose the words that the reader in Spanish will know exactly what he was referring to, you know.
Exactly.
So you can help with the translation to make those things resonate, and then it's just a matter of curious reader who's going to look it up. Okay.
All right, that's what I was going to say. That's one of my criteria, whether I have to give a footnote, is if it's something that the person can Google, and I've been Googling all through this checking, like Subenene Sube. I want to know if I Google that, what's going to come up? Well, mostly the El Gran Combo song came up, but if you scroll down far enough, it talks
see
about the TV show.
TV show.
I never found Los Hermanos Caraballo, so I don't know whether that's an invention or not, but it sounded like a real life thing. So I never found that one. But if it's something that the person can easily Google, if you leave it in Spanish and they can Google it and they can find something in English that's going to explain it, then you have no more responsibility. That's fine.
Yeah.
But still, I always hate for there to be something that's lost. I
Yeah.
know things will be lost in translation, especially with this text, there's going to be things lost. And you can't do everything. You can't write a whole essay on the Caguas attitude in your footnote. It's going
But in the preface, I was thinking that
things-
maybe
right.
some things could be just mentioned in the preface.
But that's
So-
not going to help the reader if the translation's ever published. It's not going to
Well,
help
no,
the
I'm
reader to
talking
know
about,
that in his preface he said this
you're
thing a long time
you're
ago.
Right. No, I'm talking
But-
about this exercise.
right.
Yeah, you're right.
But there are things that if you give very much explanation, and I mentioned this in several of my comments, like a couple of sometimes the lyrics of the song, you shortened them, simplified them, and I commended you for it in at least one instance, because going into detail of getting that part about I love Jehovah even when it hurts, that's going to interrupt the flow of the story. And it's not necessary. And you left out
Funny,
part
I
of that.
disagreed with you. It's
Okay,
funny
you
because I
did.
disagreed.
Okay.
Yeah, but just because even if it hurts in this context, the hurt is important. But
It
yeah,
is,
yeah,
but
yeah, no, I can see your point. All
but
right, well,
as Jesus said in his preface, the book draws you in, even
Yeah.
with flaws in the writing and the
yeah.
editing and so forth, but the book draws you in, and part of that is that the flow keeps going. So
Yep.
interrupting it too much to get every single nuance into the translation can be a disservice. And we agree in principle, maybe not in individual instances, but we agree in principle on that one, I think.
Yeah. So thank you, Jesus, again for inviting us to this
Yes.
very interesting
Thank you,
discussion.
Aurora. I took a lot of your comments to heart as well. I worked on some other things, and I was like, wow, she's right about a lot of these things, and I must agree with all these things. So I'm really grateful for both of your comments, as well as for all the help that David Auerbach, my mentor, of course, helped.
I have one question too, and this is something that slipped me by, but on the list of slurs that you had ligar,
I have it.
and I don't see. I don't remember where that occurred because that's a very peninsular. Well, but it is very.
But in Puerto Rico, but that is two different things. In Spain, in the
It's hook up.
peninsula, is to hook up, but in Puerto Rico is to. Estaban ligándole los huevos. O sea, he was looking at his.
Yeah.
I didn't know that before, but
In
I
Puerto
caught
Rico,
it in there.
ligarse a
Is to
alguien
ogle.
is to ogle, right? And he
to
translated
ogle,
it correctly. Yeah. That was very a very good translation. It's not the same as to hook up, and it's funny because living in Spain, when the first time I heard se está ligando a fulano, I was like, where, how? You know, I was, what is there to ligar this person? And then you understood that it was,
Yeah.
sí, sí, sí. Es como
Okay.
velar. We have some verbs that have a different meaning.
Yeah, of course. Absolutely.
Yeah, yeah.
All right. So I think that what we'd like to do now is to separate Jesus from the
Separate him.
Pick me out. Yeah.
isolate him, put him in isolation for a short while. So Barbara will be taken into account, of course. Well, actually, at this point, it's Aurora and Jane's work who you need to take into account before submitting your thesis. But we wish to congratulate you on a very, very good job. And we've decided to give you the grade of the evaluation of notable. So congratulations, Jesus. It's been a tremendous pleasure working with you. And also, I will miss you in the classroom context as well. So, and I wish you the best in the future, you know, in your career as a translator. So, you know, congratulations.
And you're not our student anymore, you are our colleague.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you very much. I've had the pleasure of taking class with all of you. Aurora is the most recent class I took, one of the final ones. But before then, she was helping as the director for the program and helped me a whole bunch whenever I needed to change a class or something. So we really got to familiarize ourselves recently. Jane was my first introduction as translation to as an undergrad, and then when I've taken several classes with her, and she kind of solidified the reason why I wanted to study this. And I was pretty sure, but then when I took the class with Jane, I was very sure. And thank you.
That's good to hear.
Thank you very much, David. I think I've taken the most classes of you out of anybody here. And I just felt I've taken the most classes with you. I think I've taken 3 or 4 classes with you by now. And I just ended up I just felt like my work was elevated when I worked alongside with you, and I always felt like I started off a little rocky, and then I got to a place where you and both I was happy with my work as well, and I just felt that I'm just really grateful for all 3 of you, and you all meant a lot to me, and you all mean a lot to me as well. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
And once again, Jesus, congratulations. And if you have any questions, you know, over the next few days when we're dealing with the revisions, please let me know. Okay. But I look forward
Jane,
to,
right.
Yes.
You'll get mine. I have to go to the doctor right after this, but you'll get mine this evening, this afternoon or this evening.
Okay, thank you.
I just need to touch them up and finish